Welcome, Ivar Grimstad.
So, welcome to this presentation of MVC 1.0. I'm a principal consultant for Cybercom in Sweden. That is, we're a Swedish consulting company, and we do consulting stuff. Apart from that, I'm also a Java champion. I'm a NetBeans Dream Team member. I'm a speaker at conferences. I'm a JCB expert group member. Among other, the JSRs I'm in the expert group for are the JMS 2.1, the new security API for Java EE, and the MVC 1.0 specification, which is called JSR 371. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And I also realize that I actually need a new t-shirt or a new picture. So yeah, feel free to take photographs. So today, MVC. The first question we usually get when we start talking about MVC is, why? I mean, why now? I mean, we've been living with the web application for a very long time, and we have existing MVC frameworks out there. And why do we really need it? And do we really need it in Java EE? And the answer to that question is, apparently it does. Because we asked this question in the Java EE community survey back a couple of years ago, where you were asked things like, should Java EE provide support for MVC? And the community support was very clear on this. More than 60% answered, yes, we want MVC in Java EE 8. And when we asked another question, should we look at some particular framework to inspiration, it wasn't that clear. More than 50% said, I'm not sure. So we had a really free and clean slate when we started making this specification as to where to look. We can look at more or less everywhere, or we can invent something ourselves. MVC is one of the most wanted features. This is also from this survey. And MVC is down here. This one is MVC. It's almost 8% of the most wanted features in Java EE. So it's up there with security and JSON-B. So it's clearly something the community wants, and well, we're creating it. And that, since the community wants this, that's why JSR 371, or MVC 1.0 for short, was started. And the way this is done in the JCP is that we form an expert group. And this expert group is pretty diverse. It's represented by the big companies such as Oracle, Red Hat, InnoQ, IBM, Calum, Liferay, Microsoft, and it's also 6 individual members. And recently we've added 2 more individual members there. So we're actually 8 individual members in this group. So we're largely represented by the community by making this specification. When we talk about MVC, we usually talk about 2 kinds of MVC. It's action-based MVC and it's component-based MVC. And we're going to look at the differences between them. The important thing is that in Java EE today, there is a component-based version of MVC, and that is JSF, or Java Server Faces. But there are no action-based version of it. And good news, we're making one. So let's look at how they differ. This is a pretty common illustration of the MVC design patterns. You're probably all familiar with it, but I'll just repeat it here for short. Let's say that you have a web browser, for example, that does a request to your controller. And the controller then updates your model with the information from the request, and then after a while it renders the view. So it's a very easy illustration of MVC. So let's say how this would look like in a component-based version of MVC. In a component-based version of MVC, the controller is provided by the framework. So in JSF, you have the faces servlet, that is the controller. And you as a developer, you just implement the logic behind it. Other examples of component-based MVC are Wicket, Tapestry, Seam, which doesn't exist anymore, Apache Click, which doesn't exist anymore either. So really, the only large one out there is Java Server Faces. So if we move to action-based MVC, then the difference there is that the controller is made by you as an application developer. That means you have total control over the controller logic. And there are no standard Java EE implementation for this today. There are other alternatives out there. One of them, the most known one, is Struts 2. And another one is Spring MVC. So just to recap the two major, so we sell inspirations or competitors or whatever you want to call it. Spring MVC has been around since about 2005. It's been real-world used actually since 2008 when it was launched in Spring 2.5. And this is probably the most used one. Struts 2 has been along a little longer. It was mature in around 2007. And it's still widely used. But I don't think there are many new projects starting using Struts 2. Today, you probably would choose Spring MVC, or in the future, you would choose Java EE MVC. How many here are implementing web applications? Okay. And are you using some existing MVC frameworks, like Spring MVC? Yes? Okay. Struts? Yeah, one back there. Yeah. So you see, Spring MVC is more used, and you'll see that those who are familiar with Spring MVC will see that this is pretty similar. The important thing, and one important objective for this specification, is that it should be built on top of existing Java EE technologies. That means we shouldn't invent anything if we have it provided by the platform. That means that for the model, for example, we can use CDI and bean validations and JPA and whatever cool technologies that exist in the Java EE platform. And the view technologies that are supported by Java EE today are facelets and JSPs. Why not reuse those? For the controller, we actually don't have anything in Java EE, so there we had to do something new. And we discussed a little bit in the beginning of, after the expert group was formed, and we had a couple of key decisions, or I should actually say one key decision, because this is the single most important decision that we made in the expert group. And that is build MVC 1.0 on top of JAX-RS. Anyone using JAX-RS? Okay, not so many. Spring MVC for REST applications. Yeah? Anyone using other kind of frameworks for REST? Okay. So JAX-RS is the REST support for Java EE. So if you're familiar with JAX-RS, the learning curve for MVC will be really short. You will be familiar right away. And I'll show shortly a couple of code examples and see how it works. Actually, I will show it right away. And let's start with the controllers and move backwards from the C to the M in MVC. So to create a controller, we just create a simple Java class. In this case, the hello controller. And then I add the @path annotation. And @path is from JAX-RS. So I'm saying that my hello controller is on the @path hello. And this is one of the advantages of using JAX-RS, and I'll repeat it over and over again. We can reuse what's already there. Everybody who's done a REST interface using JAX-RS knows the @path annotation. And then we add something new stuff here, because we can't use JAX-RS just the way it is. We introduce the @controller annotation. So just decorate your JAX-RS resource with the @controller annotation, and there you go. Then we change the behavior of how JAX-RS does this stuff so that it returns the text HTML rather than, for example, application JSON that you typically will do for a JAX-RS application. And this is actually all there is to the controller, so it's not any harder than this. This is the simplest controller you can make in MVC 1.0, and I'll show you afterwards how it runs. So that actually concludes the controller. Simple, isn't it? So let's look at how we do it with the views. If we have this simple controller that we did in last steps, let's see how should we return a view from this controller. And you can do it like this. And those of you familiar with JAX-RS will see that it's the @get annotation. It says that this one listens to a GET HTTP request. In the same time, since we support JAX-RS, we support @get, @post, @put, @delete, and etc. All that JAX-RS already have for us. So it's nothing new here. The only new thing here is that we return a string. And this string is not the content of the resource we're returning, but this is the actual view that we are referring to. So this is a new thing, and because of the @control orientation, we can do this. And this example I'm showing here today is JSP. We also support JSF. Right out of the box, the specification says that any implementation must support JSF and facelets. But today, the reference implementation also supports TimeLeaf, FreeMarker, Mustache, Velocity, AsciiDoc, and a couple of more. And you can easily add your own view engine if you want to. And I'll also show how you do that. Another way of, if you don't like the way of just returning a string from a controller method, you can return a viewable. And then you can, this is an interface, so you can actually implement your viewable and add whatever functionality that you want to use in your view engine. So it's just a viewable that you return. And you can go more low level. You can use the response functionality from JAX-RS. So this is how you would do just return a response in JAX-RS and just say that, hey, I'm returning HTTP OK, and I want the entity to be my view that I return to, and just build this just exactly how you would do in JAX-RS. And here you have total control of which headers you want to add, which status codes you want to add, and whatever you want to do. So this is where you have total control over what you're doing. We're all about flexibility, so we also added an @view annotation, and that means you can have a void method in your resource set. And this is something that JAX-RS doesn't support, but since we are a controller, we can have a void resource method as long as it's annotated with @view. There is also another option. You can actually return any Java object, and we will call the toString method on that object. And that is, so you should be able to use enums, for example, for representing your views or how you want to do it. This is not something that I use a lot. I usually use the @view annotation or return just the JSP directly. We can also return the view on controller level. And this is an important thing also, that if the @controller orientation is put on class level, that means that every resource method, that means if it has some kind of @get or @post or whatever in your class, is in fact a MVC controller. So it's not the class that is a controller, it's the method. And we also allow for having the @controller annotation on method level. And that means that you can actually mix JAX-RS resources and MVC controllers in your same class if you want. And that's what we call the hybrid approach. I don't know if that's especially recommended to do, but it's actually, it's doable, so you can if you want. So that concludes the controllers and the views. Let's move on to the models. And as we saw in the previous presentation about Java EE, that there are scopes available in Java EE, and these are CDI scopes, and we support all CDI scopes. We support CDI, so that's why we support CDI scope. So if you have a request-scoped greeting class, for example, it's very simple. It just has a setter and getter and a message. Then I can, from my controller, which you now recognizes from previously, I can just inject my greeting and have it available for me for this request. So what I'm doing here is I inject the greeting, and in my controller method, I set the message to hello Minsk, and I return to the view, which I put on class level. So the view, which would be hello JSP, would look like this, and I can access my greeting through this normal way as you would do in any JSP. But in case your view technology doesn't support CDI, we have also added another option. We have the same controller, but rather than injecting a CDI-scoped model bean, we can inject a models object. And models is an object provided by the specification. And the reason why it's called models and not model is that model already exists in JSF, and we don't want the naming conflicts. So we use models. It's just a name. And this is more or less just an extension of a hash map. So you see here, rather than setting the message, I just put the message with the message as a key and hello Minsk. And in my view, it will look like this. So this is actually all you need to create a very simple MVC web application. But everybody who's worked a little bit with the web technology know that there is something called validation, and we need to validate the input a little bit. And since we know that JAX-RS comes with bean validation, and we piggyback on JAX-RS, we also support bean validation. That means that here you can see I'm using an @post HTTP method. I'm taking my form data bean. It's a bean parameter. This is JAX-RS, all of it. And I just annotate it with @valid, and that means that bean validation will kick in and validate this bean. And if I have some constraints like not null or whatever on my form data bean, and it's not met, then the bean validation will not validate it. And if the bean validation doesn't validate it, it will throw a constraints validation exception. And this is just as it's done in JAX-RS. So for example, admin, @not null, etc. And then I can, as I would do in a JAX-RS application, create a form, a validation exception mapper of constraint validation exception, and I can do whatever I wanted it. In this case, I return battle request and an error page. So what's the problem with this approach? Well, first of all, it's very difficult to recover if you lose the context. And it's very difficult or impossible to provide controller-specific logic, because every constraint validation exception I described will be handled by this exception mapper, and you will have the same error handling for every controller in your application. And you probably want to do something more specific for that particular flow. So one size doesn't fit all here. And that's why we've added something we call a binding result. So if you in your controller inject a binding result, you can check here if the binding result is failed. And if it has, then you can do something specific. Here I just do exactly the same as in a previous slide, so here it doesn't make sense. But here I could do actually something different in this controller method, and if I had another method in another place, I could do something else. The binding result supports two kinds of errors, and that is binding errors. That if you use wrong data types, you can't bind a string into an int or something like that. Or a validation error that is not validated correctly by bean validation. And you can get them per param. That means that you can actually get a validation error for a particular field and display the correct error message beside that field in your web form. I mentioned view engines, and that in these examples I'm using JSP as the view technology, but we support the bring your own view engine concept. So you can just implement a single interface, and it's done by a CDI discovery mechanism. So alternatively, you can create a CDI producer for a specific view engine. And you can override existing view engine if you like. So if you want JSPs to be handled differently than they are in the reference implementation, you're free to do that if you want. And the view engine interface is really simple. It has two methods. It's the supports method and the process view method. And the supports method is just returns a Boolean if this view is supported. And if you remember, the way we return a view is just a string. So here you can actually just check if your string ends with .jsp or .html or whatever that is you recognize your view with. And then the process view is where you do the actual processing, and that will depend on which technology you've chosen. So how do we resolve conflicts then? Because if I, as an application developer, create my own JSP view engine, and how do I ensure that this is selected and not the default one? Well, I can use the CDI annotation for priority and just set it very high. Then I ensure that my is chosen over the default one. Since we support CDI, we also support the existing CDI event system. And and that means that the apps, they can listen for any CDI events using observers. And these kind of events can be used for monitoring, debugging, tuning, or whatever you want. And the specification defines an order for the 5 events that we have created. And I'll show them here. And as you see, this is the figure I started with. And since events are fired, I thought that a fire animation would be cool, but yeah. So you see that before the controller is executed, you have a before controller event, then you have the after controller event, and if a redirect is done, you have a redirect event, and then there are before and after the view is processed. So these you can listen in. You can also create your own if you like, or a reference implementation can create their own to add, but these are the 5 that are required. And the way you listen to these is that you use the @observes annotation. So here we listen to before controller event and we just do a print line. So what about security? We are building on top of Java EE, so we support, obviously, Java EE security. And when Java EE security, the new API is there, we will build on top of that and support all of that. But there are some things that won't be supported by that specification. And that is security concepts that are specific for web applications and specific for these kind of action-based application. And one of those security mechanisms that we have chosen to add is cross-site request forgery, or support for prevention of cross-site request forgery. And we've done it so simple that add an annotation for @CSRF valid. That means we have enabled cross-site request forgery support for this method. I should say that this is configurable if you want it or not. And currently, the default is off. And we don't think that is a very good idea. We think it should be on by default. So we're probably going to change that. The on has 2 switches. It's implicit or explicit. And implicit means that all resource methods with post or put are validated. But explicit means that you have to put an annotation on it. So we're thinking of having the explicit mode as the default one, and then we don't need the off method, actually. And on the client side, to make sure that this method in the previous slide would go through without validation errors, is to add the CSRF name and a token as a hidden field in your form. And that's all you've got to do. This token is generated on the server side and validated on the post. And the MVC here is the MVC context, and that's available for you. And it has some other utility methods that are useful for you when you create your views. So we talked a little bit about scopes, and that we leverage all the CDI scopes. But there is one scope that CDI doesn't support today. Because CDI supports typically the scopes like application scopes, session scopes, request scopes, and etc. But in web application, you typically need another kind of scopes. Let's look at this example. This is a typical post response flow. The browser, via the reservation form, posts a reservation to your reservation controller. It updates the model and returns OK to a confirmation page. So what's wrong here? Or a more leading question, what happens if the user hits reload in this browser? Well, the form is resubmitted, and we don't want that. So what we want is to support the post redirect get pattern. And that means that the reservation form posts to the controller, and it updates the model. It redirects to the browser, which does a get on the confirmation controller, which gets the stuff on the model and returns to the confirmation page. And to be able to support that, we need to add another scope, and that's something we call @redirect scope. In Spring MVC, it's called @flash scope, but it's the same thing. So that means that in my message class, this is the same class as we had earlier, only now it's redirect scoped. So then I can, in my controller, if I do have the redirect scoped greeting here, the controller is request scoped as default in JAX-RS. And then if I do a redirect to another page, then the greeting will actually be the same bean, even though the controller is a new instance. So then I will be able to access this greeting in the view again. So I know it's late in the evening and you're probably tired of slides, and maybe we should look into some code. Yay! Let's see here. Of course, I'm using NetBeans as the IDE. If you're using anything else, you're using the wrong IDE. NetBeans is the definitive best IDE for Java EE development. No questions there. So if you want to be friends with me later, you got to say the same thing, right? So let's see why. First of all, if you want to make a very simple hello page, or a hello application for using the MVC framework, this is what you do. And since this is Java EE, the only annotation you need is this one. You only need the Java EE web API, because this is a web application. You don't need all the enterprise stuff. This is what you need, and it's provided, so it doesn't add anything to your WAR file. But since this is a Java EE 8 application, we also need a little bit more stuff until Java EE 8 is launched. And we need the MVC API, and we also need OSARC. And OSARC is the reference implementation of MVC. And that is only needed for runtime. You just don't compile against that one. So that's all you need to be able to run this application. Let's look at the code. There is a configuration which is a JAX-RS application, and you set a JAX-RS application path. It is recommended that this one is not empty. It can be, but it's not recommended. And you just add your controllers just as you would do with a JAX-RS application. And if we look at the hello controller, you see here it's the same one I had in the slide. It has the @path annotation, it has the @controller annotation, and injects the model subject. And I actually do some error handling here. I can take a name on the GET request or nothing, it doesn't matter. And I can post from a form and do some validation. And here you see I just put them in a hash map and in a message, no, in the model subject, and just return to the error page. I'll do some more fine-grained stuff later. And I just say hello and first name and last name. So it's no magic going on here. The hello bean itself is just very simple. It has some bean validation, so it will be validated. I've also added an event observer that just prints when the events are fired, so we can look in the log and look at how that looks. And my view is really simple. The default location for the views in an MVC application is in webinf view. Then they are protected, they can't be accessed directly, so this is where we recommend to put them. You can put them wherever you want, just override the location where it is, but this is where we recommend they should be put, and that's a good thing. So this one just prints out hello and whatever it gets in the model. So if you run this one, I run this one in an application server called Payara, and Payara is a fork from Glassfish, and this is the latest version of Payara, which is 4.1.162. You can also run the nightly version of Glassfish, but Payara is, I mean, it's the same server, so you run whatever you want. It doesn't support, you cannot run it in a non-Glassfish application server yet, because the reference implementation is unfortunately tied to Jersey, and Jersey is a part of Glassfish. So, but when there are more implementations, you can run in any application server and have it fully portable. So let's see, if I submit this, it should write hello Donald Duck. It shouldn't be any surprise. And let's look at what happens with the events. So if we look here, it says that we have the before controller, then the after controller, and then we had before view and after view. A redirect event is not thrown, since we aren't doing any redirects here. So let's look at a CDI example. It is exactly the same application. Other than here, I don't inject the model subject. I just have the hello bean here, which is I get from the form. And the hello bean is, in this case, it is in addition to the bean validation, it also has a scope, which I didn't need in the previous version. But here I have a scope. And then it's request scoped, and it will be accessible through this request. Otherwise, it's exactly the same application. So if we run this one, it should be running exactly the same. So Donald Duck is Kalle Anka in Swedish. So now you learn something, languages other than Java. I mean, we were talking at speakers dinners yesterday. Which languages do you speak? And do you speak Swedish or Norwegian, or no? We speak Java, you know. Yeah, it's a Java conference. So. Let's look at a more advanced example, and that is the post-redirect get example that I showed earlier, and it has exactly the same configuration as the other ones. It has a couple of more controllers. The controller here is has some injections here, a reservation object. It has a reservation service, which could have been an EJB, and I think it actually is, but whatever you would call it to do the business logic behind this application. In this case, it just generates an ID, that's all it does. And I have a messages object, which is just a way of displaying messages. And I just, when I get the reservation form being in, I just set the properties on the reservation. I check for errors, and in this case, I just set the errors. I get the validation errors from the binding results and just set it on my messages object, so I can retrieve it from there later. If it's something wrong, I just return in a bad request HTTP code, but I go to the same page as I did earlier. I don't go to an error page. And if everything is good, I just save the reservation and I go to a confirmation page. So let's look at the pages. My reservation page is just a simple form. It has a name, an account, and a date. And you can see here that I write the error messages out here if in red font if it doesn't validate. Let's run this one. Oh, did I press debug now? Then it's a little bit slower, but it still works. It has to restart the server since I pressed debug. I just was a little fast there. So let's see what's happening. Okay. So here we have the reservation form. And you see it has a name, and if I just press save, it will do the validation, and it says between two. If I press 2 here, it just validates the fields that you are not validated with. So this gives you more fine-grained control of your application. So if I say this one, I will get to a reservation confirmed. But if you saw in my code that what I'm doing here is just to send directly to the response to the confirmation page. So what happens if I reload this page is that the form will be resubmitted. And this is something we don't want, and if I do this, you see I get a new ID. And so this is a typical case where the post redirect get pattern would be nice to use. And I'll show you how simple that is. First of all, I don't reload the confirmation page directly. I do a redirect. To the confirmation, and I don't go to the confirmation JSP, I go to the confirmation controller. That's all I need to do from this one. And in the confirmation controller, which I've already made, that doesn't do anything other than just displaying the confirmation JSP. It could have been a method on the same class, but here I've chosen to have a separate controller class. And the next thing I need to do is to change the request scope for my reservation to be redirect scoped. So that should be enough. And we're up here, and if I just type in the stuff you need to get validated, and I save it, you see that if I refresh this page, it doesn't resubmit the form. And I'll show you once more, so you can see that I'm not fooling anybody here. This is hard to read because I don't know how to beef the font in this developer tools, but I'll drag it up a little like this. And if I write something in my form like this, submit it, and you can see here that it's a post that is done, you get a 303, which redirects to the confirmation, which does a get. So you have the post, redirect, get. So, but we also want security in this one. So let's add the cross-site request forgery support. So then I'll just go in here and add the annotation at CSRF valid. And if I now run my application, I can remove this one. Let's see here. When I run the application, you see that it says validation of CSRF failed due to missing field, and it actually does that before bin validation is performed. So what I must do to support this is to add the field in the hidden field in the form, and this is the MVC CSRF name and value for the token. So by adding this in the form and reload the page, it should be okay. Let's see if I have to restart the server. Yeah, and now you see it does validate. So that's pretty easy, just to add the annotation and then add the token to your view. Those of you who are familiar with NetBeans or are a bit observant here will see that in my left-hand side in the navigation pane here, I have something called MVC controllers. So here I actually have support for MVC built in the IDE. I can navigate to my controller methods by just clicking here. If I remove one of these methods, it automatically updates this view. So it's actually pretty good support, and this was added last week at Devox UK by a guy called Gerton, which is responsible for NetBeans. So we just sat together in the Hacker Garden and created this plugin. But I'll show you something even cooler. And that is, here I have a very, it's an empty web project. It has the same configuration as the other ones I showed. And the only thing, it has no source code apart from a database model. So the only thing here is a database model, and it has an owner, a cookbook, and a recipe. So it's a very simple model with a couple of relations between them. I can here draw them, I can generate the code, I can do reverse engineering, and I can set the constraints on the fields here, so I can have the bean validation and just set it as I want. But the really cool thing here is that I can generate source code from this. So if I press generate source code, you see that I have an MVC generator. This is a project I'm choosing. It's pre-filled in here. It's an MVC controller. I'm using JSPs. This is for the views. I can override it if I want to. In the MVC, I can choose to have a hybrid class or a non-hybrid class. That means if I have controllers on method or class level. I can have authentication. This is JSR 375. That's Java EE security support. Right now, I don't have added that to the POM files. I can have support for cross-site request forgery and add whatever event I want. I can also just create a naming standard for my session bean facade. And if I press generate on this one, it will generate a lot of code for me. And this is an excellent way of learning MVC. You just install this plugin in MVC, draw some database schemas, or follow this tutorial on the website, press generate, and you see how to build an MVC application. And as you see here, it has generated a lot of stuff for you. The controls are here. They have everything you need with full CRUD functionality for this simple application. I can run it directly. I don't have to do anything, just generate it and run it. And it runs, and it looks pretty cool. Now I have if I increase this a little bit, you see I have an application that I can add a recipe to it. I'm running out of time, so I won't write the recipe down here. So, and you see that I have a dashboard, some stuff on it counts here. It's actually mobile enabled. So if I run it on a mobile device, it will look like this. So it's a really powerful way of learning MVC and seeing how the code works. And you can just, by one click, generate an entire web application, which has security, it's protected, and it's everything there. So what I said, we have tool support. This is Gaurav Gupta. He's from India. He's the one who's created this, generator tool for NetBeans. Check it out. I'll make the slides available so you can get the URLs. This is Gareth Johnny. He's the one who made the MVC support in the left-hand side in NetBeans. To sum up, what we've talked about so far is that MVC is action-based. That is, you create the controller. It's not a component-based like JSF. It's not a replacement for JSF. Both frameworks are going to live long and prosper forever. It's built on existing Java EE technologies. That means you don't have to learn anything new. You can use CDI, JAX-RS, you can use JSPs with facelets, you have bean validation, everything you know from your Java EE day-to-day work. The most important thing we decided was to build MVC on top of JAX-RS, and we get all this for free. The alternative was using serverless technologies, but then we had to make a lot of more things ourselves. Information about the MVC projects is found on java.net. The MVC spec, just Google it, you'll find it. We have a GitHub page where you can find the source code, so you can download it, build it, you can fork it, play with it, create things. Pull requests, we're very eager to get contributions back. Everything you spot, if there's a bug or improvement or whatever, just come to us. The OSARC implementation is also on GitHub on our site, and it also has a separate, which is osarcjava.net, where you can find information. You can download a Docker container with OSARC pre-installed and all examples and everything, and you can just play around with it. The samples for this presentation is available on my GitHub. I have a blog. I write occasionally of MVC, I write of Java EE, of anything. So just access these pages and comment and contact me on Twitter or whatever. So this is what I had today. It's been a real pleasure being here in Minsk. It's my first time in Belarus, and I'll be glad to come back later. I hope you enjoyed it, and I think we have like 1 minute for questions.
Does anyone have a question for Ivar? Seems no. So, okay, once again, please.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ivar. Yeah. Нам понадобится вновь 2-3 минуты.